There is a particular kind of disappointment that does not announce itself. It does not arrive when the storm hits, or the power goes out, or the shelves at the store run empty. It arrives quietly, a few days in, when someone opens the pantry they spent months carefully building and realizes that several things they counted on are not going to work the way they expected. The smell is off. The texture is wrong. The math does not add up. The product that was supposed to last for years has not. This is not a hypothetical. It happens to careful, well-intentioned people who did everything they thought was right. And the reason it happens is not laziness or carelessness. It is that almost nobody in this space talks about the failure modes. Everyone covers what to buy. Almost no one covers what is already sitting on your shelf that is quietly working against you. This video is about 12 foods that show up in the majority of home stockpiles across the country. They are not obscure items. They are not mistakes made by beginners. They are the products that experienced preppers have on their shelves, that show up on every beginner list, that feel like obvious choices, and that have specific documentable ways of failing when the situation they were purchased for actually arrives. Not all of them fail the same way. Some degrade faster than the packaging implies. Some are actively counterproductive in crisis conditions, not just neutral. Some are simply a poor use of limited budget compared to alternatives most people never consider. Each failure mode is different. Each one is worth understanding before it becomes a problem you discover at the worst possible time. We start with the one that almost every stockpile has, and almost every stockpile stores incorrectly. White rice from the grocery store shelf is the cornerstone of emergency food storage in American homes. It has a reputation for lasting practically forever, and that reputation is not wrong. Under the right conditions, white rice stored properly can remain safe and nutritionally intact for 20 to 25 years. That number is real and well documented. The problem is the conditions. The packaging that white rice comes in at a standard grocery store, the paper bag, the thin plastic bag, the standard cardboard container, was designed for a shelf life of 6 to 18 months under normal pantry rotation. It was not designed for long-term emergency storage. Moisture penetrates those materials. Oxygen degrades the grain over time. In warmer climates or in homes where the storage area experiences temperature swings, a garage, a basement without climate control, a closet near an exterior wall, the degradation happens faster. The 25-year shelf life that gets cited everywhere assumes the rice has been transferred to airtight, oxygen-free storage with moisture absorbers. It assumes conditions that a grocery store bag does not provide. Most people do not know this distinction exists because the packaging does not explain it, and most stockpile guides skip it. So the white rice sits in the original bag, in a closet or garage, and the clock is running much faster than anyone realizes. The correction is not expensive. Airtight food-grade containers with oxygen absorbers cost a few dollars and turn a 6-month problem into a multi-decade solution. The food is the same. The only difference is the container. But that difference is the entire difference between a stockpile that works and one that does not. Brown rice presents a related problem, and it is one of the most common misunderstandings in food storage. Many people treat white rice and brown rice as equivalent options for a stockpile. One might even seem like the better choice nutritionally, since brown rice retains its outer bran layer with additional fiber and micronutrients. The issue is that the bran layer that makes brown rice more nutritious is also where the natural oils are concentrated. Those oils oxidize. At room temperature, in a standard storage environment, brown rice has a shelf life of approximately 6 to 12 months before the oils begin to turn rancid and the flavor becomes unpleasant. White rice, stripped of the bran, has no significant oil content to oxidize, which is precisely why it stores for so much longer. For everyday cooking and nutrition, brown rice is an excellent choice. For a long-term stockpile that needs to stay viable across years rather than months, it is a liability. Anyone who has stocked brown rice, assuming it functions like white rice for storage purposes, needs to check those bags. The timeline may have already passed. The canned goods section of most stockpiles is where a different kind of confusion takes root, and it starts with a misunderstanding of what dates on cans actually mean. There is a widespread belief that the date printed on a can represents the point at which the food becomes unsafe to eat. That is not what most of those dates mean. The majority of dates on commercially canned goods in the United States represent the manufacturer's estimate of peak quality, flavor, texture, color, not a safety threshold. Food safety researchers and federal food agencies have consistently documented that commercially canned goods stored in reasonable conditions remain microbiologically safe, well beyond the printed date, often by years. The practical problem cuts in both directions. People throw out perfectly good canned food because the date passed, wasting money and depleting the stockpile. And people keep cans in poor storage conditions, rusted, dented on the seams, stored in damp spaces, assuming the date on the label is still the relevant metric. It is not. A can that has been stored in a dry, stable environment and shows no physical damage is almost always safe to use, regardless of what the date says. A can that is stored in humidity, shows rust along the seam, or has any signs of swelling should be discarded, regardless of the date. Learning to evaluate physical condition rather than relying on the printed date is one of the most practical skills in home food storage, and it is almost never covered. Crackers, rice cakes, and similar shelf-stable snack items occupy a category in stockpile planning that gets evaluated on the wrong criteria. People add them for variety, for caloric density per dollar, for the comfort of familiar foods. And all of those reasons are legitimate. The issue is palatability over time and its relationship to morale. Research on human behavior during extended emergencies, including documented case studies from natural disasters and prolonged utility outages, consistently identifies food fatigue as one of the primary quality of life problems people face after the initial days. It is not a medical crisis. It is a psychological one. When families have access only to foods they find unpleasant or monotonous, the practical effect is that people eat less than they should. Children refuse meals, and stress around mealtimes compounds other stresses that are already elevated. Crackers and dry snack items stored past their optimal window, typically 3 to 6 months after opening, and 12 to 18 months sealed depending on fat content and humidity exposure, develop a stale, cardboard-like quality that makes the palatability problem worse rather than better. This does not mean crackers do not belong in a stockpile. It means they need rotation, not long-term storage, and that whoever is planning the stockpile should think explicitly about what their family will actually eat under stress, not just what provides calories on paper. Granola bars and cereal bars with nuts, seeds, or dried fruit are among the most popular convenience additions to emergency food supplies, and they fail for a reason that is not immediately obvious when you pick one up off a shelf. The fats in nuts and seeds, particularly polyunsaturated fats, which are the nutritionally beneficial ones, are chemically unstable. They oxidize when exposed to oxygen, light, and heat. This oxidation process, known as rancidity, produces compounds that create the distinctive off flavor that anyone who has ever eaten a stale nut has experienced. In a product like a granola bar, where those fats are distributed through the entire bar and exposed to the interior atmosphere of the packaging, the process begins the moment the package is sealed and accelerates with temperature and light exposure. For bars stored at room temperature in a pantry, 6 to 8 months is a reasonable estimate of when flavor degradation becomes noticeable. In a garage or storage unit where summer temperatures climb significantly higher, that timeline shortens considerably. the bars will not make you sick. They will simply taste like something you do not want to eat, which, in the context of an emergency where morale and caloric intake both matter, is a real problem. Now, we need to talk about instant noodles, because this is the item that most needs honest examination. And it is also the item that most stockpile guides either skip entirely or treat as an obvious win because of low cost and long shelf life. The shelf life is real. The cost is real. The problem is the sodium. A standard serving of instant noodles, one package, which most adults would consider a small meal, contains anywhere from 800 to over 1,200 milligrams of sodium. The recommended daily intake for a healthy adult is 2,300 milligrams. One package of instant noodles can represent more than half of that in a single meal. Under normal circumstances, where someone is sedentary, well hydrated, and has access to a varied diet, this is a manageable concern. Under emergency conditions, it becomes a significant physiological problem. Here is what happens to the body under crisis conditions that most people do not factor into their food planning. Physical exertion increases. People are moving supplies, dealing with property damage, managing logistics they do not normally manage. Stress elevates cortisol levels, which affects fluid regulation. Access to clean water may be limited or uncertain, creating pressure to conserve. Sleep is disrupted. These conditions, in combination, put the body in a state where hydration is already compromised and sodium management is already stressed. Adding a high sodium food to that physiological picture does not just fail to help, it actively worsens the situation. Excessive sodium intake drives thirst, draws fluid from cells, and increases the body's water requirements at precisely the moment when water may be the most precious resource available. The food that millions of Americans purchase as their primary emergency staple, cheap, easy to prepare, long shelf life, is nutritionally counterproductive in the exact conditions it was purchased for. This is not a fringe concern. It is basic physiology. The people who understand this and have quietly replaced their instant noodle supply with alternatives that deliver similar caloric density and preparation simplicity without the sodium load are ahead in a way that most stockpile conversations never surface. Cooking oil stored in plastic containers is another product where the gap between perceived shelf life and actual shelf life in real storage conditions is larger than most people realize. The issue is a combination of two factors. First, plastic containers used for cooking oil are slightly permeable to oxygen over time, and that oxygen exposure accelerates the oxidation of the oil inside. Second, light, even ambient indoor light, catalyzes oxidation in oils, which is why high-quality oils are typically sold in dark glass bottles. Cooking oil stored in a clear or translucent plastic container on a shelf that receives any light exposure has a real-world shelf life that is often closer to 6 to 12 months under typical home conditions, regardless of the date printed on the label. The oil does not become dangerous in the way that contaminated food becomes dangerous. It becomes rancid, which affects flavor, cooking performance, and the nutritional integrity of meals prepared with it. For a stockpile intended to support a family through a period of disruption, oil quality matters, both for palatability and for the fat-soluble vitamin absorption that cooking oil facilitates. The practical solution is simple. Transfer oil intended for long-term storage into dark glass bottles with tight seals. Store in a cool, dark location, and rotate stock regularly. The cost difference is negligible. The outcome difference is significant. Protein powder occupies an interesting position in some household stockpiles, particularly in homes where fitness is a regular part of daily life. People who already buy it in bulk for regular use sometimes designate older containers as emergency supply. The problem is a combination of factors that compound over time. Protein powder clumps as it absorbs moisture from the air. The amino acid profile, the actual nutritional value, degrades after the container has been opened and exposed to ambient humidity, typically declining meaningfully within 6 to 12 months of opening. And in an emergency scenario, preparation may not be simple. Protein powder requires clean water, and depending on the source of the protein and the additives in the specific product, the digestibility and palatability can change significantly with water temperature and mixing method. None of this makes protein powder a bad product. It makes it a poor fit for long-term emergency storage as a primary protein source, particularly when shelf-stable protein alternatives, canned fish, dried legumes, dehydrated eggs, deliver comparable nutrition with significantly better storage characteristics. Nuts and seeds sold in original retail packaging present the same oxidation problem as granola bars, with an additional variable. The packaging quality varies significantly between products, and most retail packaging is not designed for storage beyond the standard retail timeline. The nitrogen flushing and vacuum sealing that extend shelf life in premium storage products are not features of standard retail nut packaging. Once a bag of mixed nuts has been open for more than a few weeks, the oxidation clock accelerates noticeably. Even unopened, nuts in standard packaging, stored past 12 to 18 months in normal home conditions, frequently show detectable rancidity. For stockpile purposes, nuts are best purchased in vacuum-sealed containers specifically designed for longer storage, or transferred immediately to airtight containers with oxygen absorbers. The nutritional value of nuts, caloric density, healthy fats, protein per dollar, makes them worth including in a well-planned stockpile. The storage method is what determines whether that value is available when needed. Honey is one of the few foods with a genuinely indefinite shelf life when stored correctly. This is documented, real, and worth understanding. Archaeological finds have recovered honey thousands of years old that remained chemically stable. The mechanism is straightforward. Honey's low moisture content, low pH, and natural hydrogen peroxide production create an environment where microbial growth cannot occur. The problem is the word correctly. Honey stored in glass containers with airtight seals retains its indefinite stability. Honey stored in plastic containers, which is how the majority of honey is sold in American grocery stores, is subject to two degradation mechanisms that glass prevents. Plastic is permeable to moisture over time, and moisture absorption is the primary trigger for fermentation in honey. Additionally, there is documented migration of plasticizer compounds from certain plastic containers into the honey over extended storage periods. For a food that is being counted on as a long-term supply of natural sweetener, caloric density, and the mild antimicrobial properties that honey provides, plastic packaging is a real liability. Transferring honey to glass jars with tight lids is a 5-minute task that changes the storage calculus entirely. Freeze-dried meals packaged in single-serving or multi-serving pouches represent a category where the failure mode is purely economic, not about food quality. The products themselves are generally excellent. Good flavor retention, genuine long shelf life, real nutritional value. The issue is what that costs per calorie compared to the basic alternatives. A single pouch of freeze-dried food containing roughly 400 to 500 calories typically costs between $8 and $15 at retail. That translates to a cost per calorie that is 4 to 8 times higher than what the same caloric value costs in white rice, dried beans, oats, and cooking oil, all of which have comparable or superior shelf life when stored correctly. For a household with a meaningful food storage budget and a goal of building a 90-day supply per person, the difference between building that supply with freeze-dried pouches and building it with caloric staples is the difference between thousands of dollars and a few hundred. The freeze-dried meals are not a bad product. They are a poor primary strategy for anyone working with a limited budget, which is most people. As a supplement for variety, for specific meals, for rotation into a larger supply, they have a place. As the foundation of a stockpile, the math does not support them. The final item in this list is one that almost no one thinks to check. and that is vitamins and nutritional supplements stored beyond 18 months. The tablets and capsules do not spoil in the traditional sense. They do not grow mold. They do not develop an off smell. They look exactly the same at 24 months as they did at 6 months. What changes is potency. Vitamin C undergoes documented degradation over time, particularly when exposed to light or temperature variation. B vitamins, thiamine, riboflavin, B6, B12, show similar degradation curves. The supplements in the container are still chemically present. The therapeutic dose is not. For most people using vitamins as a daily supplement during normal life, slight potency degradation over time is an inconsequential issue. They have access to a varied diet that provides baseline nutrition regardless. For someone in a prolonged emergency, where fresh produce and animal proteins are unavailable and the supplement supply is genuinely serving as nutritional insurance, potency-compromised supplements are not delivering the protection they appear to offer. Vitamins intended for stockpile use should be rotated actively, first in, first out, and any supplement container that has been sitting in storage for more than 18 months should be replaced, not kept as a backup on the assumption that something is better than nothing. Here's what ties these 12 items together. None of them are mistakes made by people who were not paying attention. Every single one of them is the result of acting on information that was incomplete, on assumptions about shelf life that were slightly off, on an understanding of emergency nutrition that left out important variables, on a belief that the way a product performs normally is the way it will perform when conditions are abnormal. The people who have the most reliable stockpiles are not the ones who spent the most money or bought the most products. They are the ones who took the time to understand the failure modes, and then quietly made the adjustments. If any of these 12 items are currently on your shelf, that is useful information. Not cause for concern, cause for a calm, methodical review. Check the packaging. Check the dates relative to the storage conditions. Think about the context in which that food would actually be used. Most of the corrections are inexpensive and take an afternoon. The gap between a stockpile that looks solid and one that actually functions the way you need it to is almost always smaller than it seems. It just requires asking the questions that most guides never raise. One thing worth saying before closing: everything in this video is informational, based on publicly available research on food storage, nutritional science, and emergency preparedness data. If you or anyone in your household has specific dietary needs, medical conditions, or is managing health concerns that affect nutrition, those factors need to be part of your stockpile planning. And that conversation belongs with someone who knows your specific situation. What works as a general framework for a healthy adult may need real adjustment for someone managing a chronic condition, and no video can account for that. Plan accordingly and involve the right people in that planning. If this kind of analysis is useful to you, the kind that goes past the list and into the reasoning behind it, this channel is built entirely around that approach. Subscribe if you want to keep thinking about preparedness the way it actually deserves to be thought about.